then turns off.
Ignition cycle necessarily includes the precursor key cycle, correct? Even though every key cycle might not include an ignition cycle. Would you agree with that?
In that scenario, yes.
Fine. Okay. With that definition, I want to talk about ignition cycles because I don't want to get confused about accessories. Just assume the engine.
Okay.
Turns on, right?
Okay.
If you started your testing at 1164, then if the engine was turned on, thereby indicating initiating a key cycle, driving the car onto a flatbed truck, and then hauling it over to Canton PD, that would be key cycle 1163 in that hypothetical, correct?
It could be.
Okay. Then going backward from there, if the SUV was, I'm sorry, let me add one event that I just forgot. It had to get off the tow truck in Canton and be driven into the Sally Port. Did you ever see that video?
No.
Being driven in?
No.
If there was a video showing that the car was actually driven into the Sally Port, that would necessarily be a key cycle, correct?
Possibly.
Okay, so that would be key cycle 1163. My mistake, I was missing one, right?
Okay.
Before that, if the car was turned on and driven onto the flatbed to get to Canton, that would be key cycle 1162 in order, correct? We're going back.
It's possible.
All right. Before that, if the car was started and the car was driven from One Meadows Avenue to Karen Reed's parents' home in Dighton, that would be another key cycle, 1161, correct?
They're possible.
Before that, if the SUV was started and driven by Miss Reed from the garage at John O'Keefe's house to Jennifer McCabe's house at 5:07 in the morning, that would be another key cycle, correct? 1160. Isn't that right?
It's possible.
And before that, if the SUV was started and driven by Miss Reed to the waterfall, from the waterfall to 34 Fairview at approximately 12:15 a.m., that would be another key cycle, 1159, right?
It's possible.
I want to be clear. The reason that these numbers skip in your diagram, they don't go directly in order, right? Every single number is in order on this left-hand column because this is only a diagram of when triggering events occur, right?
Yes.
Something unusual about the operation of the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And it's clear that from the data, there was no triggering event at key cycle 1159, was there?
No.
So assuming the driving events that I just told you, right? Assuming for purposes of my question that the driving events started at 11:59, driving over to 34 Fairview from the waterfall, then driving at 5:07 in the morning over to Jenny McCabe's house, 11:60, then driving to Dighton, her parents' house, 11:61, then the car being seized in Dighton by Trooper Proctor, 11:62. Then the car being taken off the flatbed and driven into the Sally Port at Canton, 11:63. Your testing starts at 11:64. That would mean that at 11:62, that key cycle would include the time in which Trooper Proctor had possession of that car, correct?
No.
Assuming my hypothetical.
Your hypothetical?
Yes.
If that's hypothetically how it works, then yes.
Then what?
If that's hypothetically how it works, then yes.
On June 9th, 2022, you were asked by a grand jury whether you knew or had done any scientific testing to determine the distance a body would actually travel struck by a vehicle. Remember that?
Not that specifically. Not in that way.
Do you remember answering that you had not, I'm just paraphrasing, that you had not done you hadn't finished your report yet?
Why don't you show him? He said he didn't remember it that way.
Yeah?
Yes.
Take a look at middle of the page. Your answer starts at about line 12, but the question above it is probably informative. You have that in mind?
Yep.
May I approach?
Yes.
You were asked, does that remind you that you were asked by a grand juror if you could calculate how far a body would move having been struck by a vehicle?
Yes.
And you indicated, quote, yeah, there's certain calculations we can do with that. Would figure out if you say if the car backed up, hit somebody, and then they go a certain amount of distance, and it's based on miles per hour, the speed of the vehicle, the striking vehicle, and stuff. Remember saying that?
Yes.
What did you mean by stuff?
I don't know.
You said that the calculations would be based on miles per hour and stuff. Did you ever do any stuff to test that? That's the grand juror's question.
No, we cannot calculate anything from this collision.
Say that one more time.
We cannot calculate anything from this collision.
Who's we?
I'm sorry, me. The role me.
Well, you know John O'Keefe's weight, right?
What's that?
You know John O'Keefe's weight, 217 pounds, right?
Yes.
Did you know that?
I don't know his weight. No.
You know the weight of the vehicle?
Yes.
What's the weight of the vehicle? Gross weight.
What's the gross weight?
Yeah.
I think it's approximately 7,300 pounds.
Okay. Were you able to calculate the mass of the vehicle?
I did not calculate the mass of the vehicle.
Well, you told the grand jury that you were planning on doing that kind of stuff to calculate how far a person would travel being struck at that speed with a car of that weight. You didn't do those calculations?
No, because the calculations would vastly underestimate the speed of the vehicle.
You testified, again, my report isn't done yet. I'm going to look into it. I'm looking into all that stuff, end quote, correct?
Yes.
There's that word again. It's been more than 2 years since that statement at the grand jury. Is your report finished?
Yes, it is.
Did you engage in any of those calculations?
I looked into it. This type of collision I would not be able to use the formulas for this type of collision.
Well, let's talk about those formulas. How would you calculate how far a body at rest would travel after being struck by an object in motion? How would you calculate that?
In pedestrian collisions, I use a Searle throw formula.
A what formula?
Searle.
What does that mean?
It's a type of formula that we use for a calculation of post-impact
So
or speeds for pedestrians.
that includes certain principles of physics to calculate that, right?
What do you mean?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by certain forms of physics?
There would be physics calculations that would be required to figure out how far a body at rest would move having been struck by an object in motion.
Right.
That's a basic principle of
Yeah, I guess you could say though.
All right. Can you describe for the jurors exactly what calculations you would need to employ to determine how far a body at rest would travel, having been struck by an object in motion?
So, in this scenario, in this collision, it's more of a side swipe. So he did not ascertain. He did not get enough speed of the vehicle post impact with the vehicle to be able calculations. His center of mass was offset from the vehicle. So we would vastly underestimate his speed. So that's why I did not do a formula. If he was more in line with behind the vehicle, he would have been projected forward, and using that projection forward, he would have been able to get more closer to the actual speed of the vehicle during that post-impact travels.
Well, that presumes a couple of things, Paul. That presumes that he was quote unquote sideswiped, right?
Presumed
by you. You didn't see how he was hit, did you?
Based on the evidence, it appeared to be a sideswipe.
That's your opinion.
That's just reading the evidence.
You're saying that the principles of physics as we know them today in modern mathematics is thwarted by a sideswipe?
Objection.
Is that what you're saying?
It's the calculations that are out there. You can get a speed, it will just underestimate the speed.
You would have to know what the initial momentum of the object is that's in motion, correct?
Of what object?
The truck, Paul.
I would have to know that speed.
Yeah, you'd have to know what the initial momentum is, not speed, momentum. There's a difference,
Okay.
right? Would you agree with that?
No.
You wouldn't have to calculate what the initial momentum is of the object in motion to determine the distance of the body at rest would move?
Well, in that sense, are we talking about trying to find the speed of the vehicle? That's usually what we're trying to do.
Right, okay. Well, let's put the speed of the vehicle aside. Let's talk about initial momentum. What's the formula for calculating initial momentum?
There's different types of momentum formulas.
Well, there's actually one type of momentum formula. It's to calculate momentum.
Objection.
Sustained.
To calculate momentum, there is a single.
So sustained. Ask it differently.
Isn't it true, Trooper Paul, that there is a singular calculation for determining initial momentum? That is P equals M times V, where P is the momentum. You're solving for that. M is mass. You multiply that by velocity. Is that right? Pretty simple.
You wouldn't use that in a pedestrian collision.
Oh, because the pedestrian's somehow magically out of the realm of physics?
Objection.
Sustained.
Is a pedestrian out of the realm of physics and calculations?
No, it's the weight differential between the pedestrian and the vehicle.
So if the vehicle is too heavy and the body is too light, you can't calculate the initial momentum of the vehicle?
Yes.
Got it. Where'd you learn that?
It's in my math class. We only use momentum for a vehicle to vehicle.
Math class?
The crash reconstruction classes I have taken.
Got it. Would you need to apply the theory of conservation of momentum in calculating these data?
Do I need to calculate the conservation of momentum?
Of conservation of momentum.
Yes.
You even know what that is? There's an equation for that as well, right?
Yes.
You know what that is?
Not off the top of my head, but yes.
Based on the basic principles of physics, is the total momentum of the collision greater or less than the total momentum after the collision? Total momentum before the collision, is it greater or less than the total momentum after the collision? Basic question.
What type of collision?
Trooper Paul, they're exactly equal in all respects under the principles of physics, right? That's the theory of the conservation of momentum. Momentum doesn't change. It's just transferred from one body to another.
Yes.
Correct?
Correct.
Why didn't you say that to the jurors?
Objection.
Sustained.
Trooper Paul, if you were qualified to, quote, look into all this stuff, you would probably know these answers, wouldn't you?
Objection.
Sustained.
Are there any other calculations that you'd need to figure out the stuff that you were talking to about with the grand jury?
Objection.
Sustained.
How about calculating the final velocity of the objects after the collision? Would that be important?
What objects?
That would be John O'Keefe's body, sir. Object
I don't.
that you claim was flying through the air 30 feet.
Okay,
Objection.
sustained.
How about calculating the displacement using kinematic equations? Would you be able to do that?
The displacement of the body.
In order to calculate how far the body would move based on the mass of the object striking the body, could you use displacement using kinematic equations?
So, like I said before, the side swipe, he would not have gotten 100% of the vehicle, 100% of the speed of the striking vehicle. It would have vastly underestimated this vehicle. You couldn't hit a person and side swipe them, spin them off to the side, and have that and get a speed from those calculations.
So you're saying that the discipline of physics cannot figure out how far John O'Keefe's body would move, but you personally figured out that he would have flown now somewhat, or been projected somewhat 30 feet.
Objection.
Is that right?
Sustained.
Are you saying that the principles of physics are incapable of determining with the proper calculations how far John O'Keefe's body would have moved given the collision at issue?
Objection.
Is that what you're saying, Trooper?
No.
Okay, next question.
Well, you just said because it was a side swipe, all these calculations, these physics calculations are inapplicable, right?
But I'm saying it would underestimate the speed and the distance.
The truth is, Trooper Paul, you have no idea what all these physics calculations mean, do you?
Objection.
Sustained.
You've not been trained in physics formally, have you?
Yes.
You have been,
It's incorporated into the classes.
right? You had a few classes that used the word physics, but you haven't been formally trained in physics, have you?
Objection.
Sustained.
You haven't been formally trained in kinematics, correct?
It's in the aspects of all our crash reconstruction classes.
You haven't been formally trained and hold no degrees in biomechanics, do you?
I do not have a degree in biomechanics.
In fact, basically what you did in this case was calculated ignition cycles. And you got those wrong, right?
Objection.
Sustained. Come on, Mr. Jackson. Ask the appropriate part of the question, you'll get it.
Let me ask you this. Based on your reconstruction, nearly 2-year investigation, exactly how was that taillight shattered? Explain it to us.
How does the taillight? What do you mean? It gets so the taillight in this case was shattered when it was struck John O'Keefe's arm.
Exactly what part of his arm?
Based on what I saw for his injuries, was from the upper part of his arm down.
Was his arm out? It just struck the arm like a hinge? Was it in front of him? You did the reconstruction?
It looked,
Here's exactly how his body was positioned when he was struck by that.
so it looks like his arm was more kind of like this. If I can try to get that.
You're indicating out by his side, correct?
Yes.
All right. And the taillight would have struck his arm, right?
Yes.
Not his torso.
Yes.
Okay. So the full mass, the full weight of that truck hit him basically at the elbow. Is that right?
No,
Missing his
no.
torso.
I said it. Yeah, from the upper part of the arm
Right.
down.
The
Yeah.
elbow and the biceps.
I didn't see anything that shows an indication that this lower torso was struck, but
Okay. So his torso,
it's not saying it could not have been a possibility, but I just didn't see anything.
So his torso was spared from being hit, but the arm took the brunt, the full force of the vehicle, correct?
Like arms and shoulder, yes.
Okay. And you said he then did a spin, like a sort of a pirouette.
He got spun around possibly the way he struck, it looked like it could have turned around counterclockwise.
Okay. So if he turns around counterclockwise, is he turning around in the air counterclockwise?
Yes,
Okay.
initially.
So he gets hit on the upper biceps, shoulder area, and down to the forearm, right?
Yes,
By an unbroken taillight, right?
yes,
In other words, it's nice and smooth. Nothing, no shards of plastic or anything broken at the time that it made contact with his arm, right?
correct.
Okay. So how did his arm get all cut up?
Because when his arm struck the taillight then cracked, and as the car is driving past him, the taillight could scratch it.
Got it. So he gets hit by the car, not his torso, just the arm. The taillight cracks, and as it passes by, his arm stays with it long enough to get striations, those scratches that you see, those lacerations, those abrasions that you see, right?
In a sense, yes.
And at the same time, he does a pirouette and flies 30 feet to his final point of rest.
I don't know if he did a pirouette.
Well, I'm using the word pirouette. He spun around.
He started rotating counterclockwise. I don't know how far he ran counterclockwise, but he started rotating. According to that, would push him to rotate counterclockwise. Whether or not he went counterclockwise all the way to his back toward the ground, it seems like a most likely possibility.
Did you account for the fact that his arm is on a hinge?
Is what? Say again?
Did you account for the fact in this scenario that you just told the jurors that his arm is on a hinge?
On a
It's called
hinge.
Shoulder.
Okay.
Right? So, the arm got hit. Didn't his arm just swing?
I said arm and shoulder area, so his arm could have been considered part of it.
Even if his shoulder got the upper,
Okay.
you're pointing to his upper biceps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no injuries on his shoulder, not a single one, not even a bruise. Right?
Like I said, it looked like to me it was from up here. I don't know how far I can up back here, but it was up here.
Well,
So
you're the one that talked about his injuries on his arm.
yes.
That's limited to about mid biceps, to about mid forearm, correct?
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
No injuries on the shoulder, no injuries on the torso, no injuries on the ribs, no injuries on the back, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
So your theory is you got hit on the arm, took the brunt of the force from the taillight on the arm, stayed with the vehicle long enough for the taillight to explode, basically, to shatter. Then these striations get on his arm, abrasions. Does a pirouette, spin, counterclockwise, and flies 30 feet in the air to his point of rest.
Yeah. Happened probably a little faster than that, though.
I thought you said he hit his head on the curb.
I said that's one of the possibilities of when you look at the roadway as he gets spun around kind of clockwise. It's a possibility that the curb is there, any blunt force object on the ground, as the ground is pretty blunt.
Well, except in your scenario that you just told us, he flew through the air onto the light dusting of snow, grass, and dirt.
I didn't say through the air.
Say that again.
I didn't say he got thrown through the air.
Okay, I'll use your word. He got projected. Like a
Projected doesn't mean it's not incorporating just throw. Project just means you get pushed forward. There's two parts of that. There's the air, then there's the ground. Like I said earlier, the tumbling, the rolling, whatever that part of the crash would happen. Projecting is just what we call what happens to a pedestrian post impact with a crash.
Okay, so a couple questions. If his arm, elbow took the brunt of that entire impact, how do you account for the fact that he didn't suffer a broken bone?
I don't know.
How do you account for the fact that he didn't have a fracture?
Objection.
Sustained.
How do you account for the fact that he didn't even have a bruise on the arm?
Objection.
That's sustained.
May we approach?
Yes.